Republic Pictures Studios, Hollywood, March 15, 1962. Sandra Mills, John Wayne's personal secretary for 8 years, sits across from Wayne's desk with tears in her eyes and bruises on her wrists that she's tried to cover with makeup and long sleeves. She has worked up the courage to tell Wayne something that happened 3 days earlier, something she's been afraid to report because it involves the son of the most powerful man at Republic Pictures. What Sandra is about to reveal will test Wayne's principles against his pragmatic career interests, forcing him to choose between protecting a vulnerable employee and maintaining the studio relationship that has made him wealthy and famous. Wayne's response to Sandra's story will end a 15-year partnership with Republic, destroy a young man's Hollywood career, and establish a precedent for how Wayne handles injustice when he has the power to do something about it, regardless of the personal cost. Sandra Mills came to work for Wayne in 1954, fresh out of secretarial school and eager to be part of the movie industry that had captivated her imagination since childhood. She grew up in a working-class family in Burbank, and her job with Wayne represented not just employment, but entrance into a glamorous world that most people could only observe from theater seats. Over 8 years, Sandra had proven herself indispensable to Wayne's professional operation. She managed his correspondence, coordinated his schedule, handled his business meetings, and maintained the kind of discretion and loyalty that Wayne valued above technical skills. Wayne trusted Sandra with confidential information about his finances, his family, and his film projects, and she had never betrayed that trust or taken advantage of her access to Wayne's private affairs. Sandra's relationship with Wayne was strictly professional, but it was also warmly respectful. Wayne treated her as a valued colleague rather than mere office staff, often asking her opinion on scripts and business decisions. Sandra, in turn, had developed deep respect for Wayne's character and integrity, seeing him as the kind of man her father had taught her to admire. Someone who kept his word, treated people fairly, and stood up for what was right. But Sandra's comfort and security at Republic Studios was shattered on March 12 when she encountered Michael Yates, the 28-year-old son of studio head Herbert Yates, in the Republic parking lot after working late to prepare materials for Wayne's upcoming film meetings. Michael Yates had grown up as Hollywood royalty with unlimited access to film sets, celebrity parties, and the kind of privileged lifestyle that money and power provide. But his advantages had not produced character or wisdom, and his behavior toward women had become increasingly predatory as he assumed that his father's position protected him from consequences for his actions. On that March evening, Sandra was walking to her car when Michael approached her under the pretense of casual conversation about her work with Wayne. Sandra was polite, but tried to end the interaction quickly, sensing something unsettling about Michael's manner and his insistence on walking her to her car, despite her protests that she was perfectly safe alone. What happened next traumatized Sandra and would have remained hidden if she hadn't found the courage to trust Wayne with the truth. Michael's assault was brief but violent, and Sandra's resistance only seemed to anger him further. When she managed to break free and reach her car, Michael warned her that reporting the incident would be pointless because nobody at this studio will believe you over me. For 3 days, Sandra debated whether to tell Wayne what had happened. She feared that Michael was right about his protected status. and she worried that reporting the assault might cost her the job she needed to support herself and help her aging parents. But Sandra also knew that Wayne was different from other powerful men in Hollywood. He had a reputation for treating people fairly and standing up for those who couldn't protect themselves. Have you ever had to decide whether to trust someone with information that could change both your lives? Sometimes courage means believing that good people will do the right thing when given the chance. Sandra's decision to tell Wayne required her to overcome not only fear of professional retaliation, but also the shame and self-doubt that assault victims often experience. She worried that Wayne might question her account, blame her for being in the parking lot alone, or decide that avoiding conflict with Herbert Yates was more important than supporting his secretary. But Sandra's 8 years of working with Wayne had shown her his character, and she believed that he would listen to her story with the kind of respect and seriousness that she deserved. When she finally found the courage to ask for a private meeting, Wayne immediately sensed that something serious was troubling her. "Sandra, whatever's wrong you can tell me," Wayne assured her as she sat across from his desk, struggling to find words for what had happened. "You've been with me for 8 years, and you've never brought me problems that weren't important. I'm listening." Sandra's account of Michael's assault was halting and painful, but Wayne listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as he understood what she was telling him. When Sandra finished her story, Wayne asked only a few careful questions to ensure he understood the details correctly, then sat quietly for several minutes, processing both the facts and their implications. Wayne's initial reaction was rage, not just at Michael's assault, but at the vulnerability that Sandra had been forced to endure alone for 3 days, while she decided whether she could trust anyone with her story. Wayne understood that Sandra's silence reflected not weakness but realistic fear about the power dynamics that protected men like Michael Yates from consequences for their actions. "Sandra, I want you to know that I believe every word you've told me," Wayne said, his voice carefully controlled, despite the anger she could see in his eyes. "What Michael did to you was wrong, and it's not going to be ignored or forgotten. You did the right thing by telling me, and you're not going to face any retaliation for it." Wayne's immediate concern was Sandra's well-being and safety. He arranged for her to see a doctor, insisted that she take paid leave if she needed time to recover, and made it clear that her job security was absolute, regardless of what actions he might take regarding Michael. But Wayne also understood that Sandra's assault represented more than an isolated incident. It was symptomatic of a power structure that allowed privileged men to abuse vulnerable women without fear of consequences. Wayne had the influence and resources to hold Michael accountable, and he felt a moral obligation to use that power to protect not only Sandra but other women who might become Michael's victims. Wayne's approach to handling Michael's assault reflected his understanding of both justice and power dynamics in Hollywood. He knew that reporting the incident through official channels would likely result in Sandra being discredited and punished, while Michael faced no meaningful consequences. Instead, Wayne decided to handle the situation directly, using his own power and influence to ensure that Michael faced appropriate consequences for his actions. Wayne's first step was to arrange a private meeting with Michael, ostensibly to discuss a potential role in one of Wayne's upcoming films. The meeting was scheduled for Wayne's office on a Saturday afternoon when the studio would be largely empty, giving Wayne the privacy he needed to have a conversation that Michael would never forget. When Michael arrived at Wayne's office, expecting to discuss career opportunities, he found Wayne sitting behind his desk with an expression of cold fury that immediately made clear this was not a friendly meeting. "Sit down, Michael," Wayne said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made disobedience unthinkable. "We need to talk about what you did to Sandra Mills 3 days ago." Michael's attempt to deny any knowledge of Sandra or any incident immediately collapsed when Wayne provided specific details about the assault that could only have come from Sandra herself. Wayne's calm recitation of the facts made clear that he knew exactly what had happened and was not interested in Michael's denials or explanations. "Here's what's going to happen," Wayne continued, his voice never rising but carrying unmistakable menace. "You're going to stay away from Sandra Mills. You're not going to speak to her, approach her, or have any contact with her whatsoever. If you see her in the hallway, you turn around and go the other way." Wayne paused to let that directive sink in before continuing with the consequences Michael would face if he violated these terms. "If you ever touch Sandra again, or if you hurt any other woman on this lot, I will personally destroy you," Wayne said, leaning forward in his chair. "I don't care who your father is or how much power you think that gives you. I will make sure that everyone in this town knows what kind of man you are, and I will use every connection I have to ensure that you never work in this industry again." Michael's attempt to bluster about his father's protection was cut short by Wayne's response. "Your father may own this studio, but he doesn't own me. And if he's smart, he'll thank me for teaching you this lesson before you do something that lands him in a lawsuit or worse." Wayne's ultimatum was clear and non-negotiable. Michael's behavior toward women would change immediately and permanently, or Wayne would make sure that Michael faced consequences that his father's position couldn't shield him from. The meeting ended with Wayne providing Michael with one final warning that left no doubt about his seriousness. "I've killed men in movies for 30 years, Michael. Don't make the mistake of thinking I don't know how to do it in real life if someone gives me sufficient reason." Michael left Wayne's office understanding that he had made an enemy of the most powerful actor at Republic Studios, but he also understood that Wayne's threats were not empty posturing. Wayne had the influence, resources, and apparent willingness to follow through on his promises, and Michael's assault on Sandra had created a situation where compromise or negotiation were impossible. Wayne's next step was to inform Herbert Yates about his son's behavior and the conditions Wayne was imposing to prevent future incidents. This conversation was far more delicate than Wayne's confrontation with Michael, requiring Wayne to balance his outrage about Sandra's assault against his awareness that Herbert Yates was a powerful man whose goodwill had been crucial to Wayne's career success. Wayne requested a private meeting with Yates, ostensibly to discuss upcoming film projects, but actually to address Michael's assault and establish clear expectations about future behavior. When Wayne explained what had happened and described his conversation with Michael, Yates's response revealed the kind of moral blindness that had allowed Michael's behavior to continue unchecked. "Boys will be boys, Duke," Yates said, dismissing Sandra's assault as youthful indiscretion rather than criminal behavior. "Michael's young and maybe he got a little too friendly, but I'm sure he didn't mean any real harm. Maybe your secretary misunderstood his intentions." Wayne's response was immediate and definitive. "Herbert, there's no misunderstanding here. Your son sexually assaulted my secretary, he hurt her, he threatened her, and he assumed that your position would protect him from consequences. That's not boys being boys, that's criminal behavior. Yates's continued attempts to minimize Michael's assault and protect his son from accountability forced Wayne to make clear the choice that Yates faced regarding his son's future at Republic Studios. "You have two options, Herbert," Wayne told the studio head. "Either Michael leaves this studio and finds work somewhere else, or I tear up my contract and take my business elsewhere. I will not work for a company that employs men who assault women and assume they can get away with it." Wayne's ultimatum put Yates in an impossible position. Wayne was Republic's biggest star and most profitable asset, generating millions of dollars in revenue through his films and attracting other talent to the studio. Losing Wayne would be financially devastating for Republic and could potentially destroy Yates's own career. But Michael was Yates's son, and the studio head's paternal instincts overrode his business judgment. Rather than accepting Wayne's conditions and removing Michael from the studio, Yates chose to protect his son and reject Wayne's ultimatum. "I'm not going to destroy my son's career based on the word of a secretary who might be looking for attention or money," Yates declared. "If you can't accept that Michael stays, then maybe it's time for you to move on to another studio." Yates's decision to choose his son over Wayne was the end of their 15-year partnership and marked the beginning of Michael's eventual downfall. Wayne immediately began negotiations to buy out his Republic contract, and within 6 weeks he had established a new partnership with other studios that would prove even more profitable than his arrangement with Republic. But Wayne's departure from Republic was only the beginning of the consequences that Michael would face for his assault on Sandra Mills. Wayne's influence in Hollywood extended far beyond his relationship with Republic Studios, and he used that influence systematically to ensure that Michael faced professional consequences for his behavior toward women. Wayne's campaign against Michael was subtle but devastatingly effective. He never publicly accused Michael of assault or made formal complaints to industry organizations. But he used his network of relationships with directors, producers, and studio executives to ensure that Michael was quietly blacklisted from meaningful opportunities in Hollywood. When Michael's name came up for roles in films that Wayne's friends were producing, Wayne would make discreet inquiries about the project and express concerns about Michael's character and professionalism. Wayne never specified what those concerns were based on, but his reputation for good judgment and integrity meant that his opinions carried enormous weight with industry decision-makers. "I'd be careful about working with that young man," Wayne would tell producers. "I've heard some troubling things about how he treats people, especially women. Might not be the kind of person you want representing your project." These conversations were enough to ensure that Michael's career opportunities dried up quickly. Producers and directors who might have been willing to overlook Michael's behavior were unwilling to risk their relationships with Wayne, and Michael found himself unable to secure roles in quality productions. Within 2 years of Wayne's departure from Republic, Michael's Hollywood career was effectively over. He had been reduced to minor roles in low-budget productions, and even those opportunities became increasingly rare as Wayne's influence continued to work against him throughout the industry. Michael's professional exile was compounded by his father's declining position at Republic Studios. Herbert Yates's decision to protect his son at the cost of losing Wayne proved to be a catastrophic business mistake that damaged Republic's profitability and reputation. The studio's financial difficulties eventually forced Yates to sell his interest in Republic, ending both his and Michael's Hollywood careers. Sandra Mills, meanwhile, continued working as Wayne's secretary throughout his transition from Republic to other studios. Wayne made sure that Sandra's salary increased significantly to compensate for any inconvenience caused by the studio change, and he continued to treat her with the respect and appreciation that had characterized their working relationship before Michael's assault. Wayne never asked Sandra whether she was satisfied with how he had handled Michael's punishment, understanding that the decision to take action had been his responsibility rather than hers. But Sandra's continued loyalty and professionalism in her work made clear that she appreciated Wayne's willingness to sacrifice his studio relationship to protect her dignity and safety. Years later, Sandra would tell friends that Wayne's response to Michael's assault had restored her faith in both men and justice after an experience that had left her feeling powerless and vulnerable. Wayne showed me that there are still men who will stand up for women, even when it costs them something important, she said. He didn't have to choose my side over the studio, but he did it without hesitation. The long-term impact of Wayne's confrontation with Michael Yates extended beyond the immediate consequences for the individuals involved. Wayne's willingness to sacrifice a profitable studio relationship to hold a powerful man's son accountable for assaulting a woman established a precedent that influenced how other Hollywood figures approached similar situations. Word of Wayne's conflict with Republic spread through the industry, though the specific details of Sandra's assault remained confidential. The story that circulated focused on Wayne's refusal to work with Michael and his willingness to leave Republic rather than compromise his principles, creating a narrative that enhanced Wayne's reputation for integrity while sending a message about the consequences of mistreating women. Other actors, directors, and producers began to understand that Wayne would use his influence to protect vulnerable people from abuse by powerful men, making them more careful about their own behavior and more supportive of women who reported harassment or assault. Wayne's handling of Michael's assault also influenced his approach to subsequent incidents involving the mistreatment of women on film sets or in business meetings. Throughout the remainder of his career, Wayne consistently demonstrated that his commitment to protecting women from harassment and assault was genuine and non-negotiable, regardless of the professional costs involved. In 1975, 13 years after the incident with Sandra Mills, Wayne intervened when he learned that a director on one of his films was pressuring a young actress for sexual favors in exchange for better roles. Wayne's response was swift and decisive. The director was fired immediately, despite the disruption and cost involved in replacing him mid-production. I learned a long time ago that protecting people who can't protect themselves is more important than protecting profits, Wayne explained to the film's producers when they questioned the cost of replacing the director. If we don't stand up for what's right when we have the power to do something, then we're complicit in what's wrong. Wayne's reputation as someone who would take action against men who mistreated women made him a trusted figure among female employees throughout the entertainment industry. Women who worked on Wayne's films understood that they could report harassment or assault without fear of retaliation, and Wayne's presence on a production became a form of protection for vulnerable cast and crew members. The story of Sandra Mills and Michael Yates remained largely private throughout Wayne's lifetime, known only to the people directly involved and a few trusted friends who understood the significance of Wayne's choices. Sandra continued working as Wayne's secretary until his death in 1979, and she always maintained discretion about the incident that had changed both their lives. But after Wayne's death, Sandra spoke more openly about the assault and Wayne's response, wanting to ensure that his character and integrity were properly understood and remembered. Her account of Wayne's willingness to sacrifice his studio relationship to protect her became part of the historical record about Wayne's personal principles and his commitment to justice. Mr. Wayne could have ignored what happened to me, or he could have handled it quietly without making any real changes, Sandra reflected in a 1985 interview. Instead, he chose to make Michael and Herbert Yates face consequences for their behavior, even though it cost him a lot of money and disrupted his career. That's the kind of man he was. He did what was right, even when it was hard. Sandra's testimony about Wayne's character helped establish his reputation as someone who lived by the moral code that his characters represented on screen. Unlike many Hollywood figures whose public personas differed significantly from their private behavior, Wayne demonstrated consistent integrity in both his professional and personal relationships. The incident with Michael Yates also revealed Wayne's understanding of how power should be used responsibly. Wayne recognized that his influence in Hollywood came with obligations to protect people who lacked similar power, and he was willing to use his resources to hold accountable those who abused their positions to harm others. Today, more than 60 years after Sandra Mills's assault and Wayne's response, their story serves as an example of how individuals with power and influence can make a difference in fighting harassment and assault. Wayne's willingness to believe Sandra, take action on her behalf, and accept professional consequences for his principles demonstrates the kind of leadership that creates safer environments for vulnerable people. The entertainment industry's ongoing struggles with harassment and assault make Wayne's example even more relevant and instructive. His story shows that protecting victims and holding perpetrators accountable requires more than good intentions. It requires people with power to be willing to use that power on behalf of those who cannot protect themselves. Wayne's confrontation with Michael Yates represents one of the most significant but least known examples of his personal courage and integrity. While audiences remember Wayne for his heroic characters and iconic performances, those who knew him personally understood that his greatest heroism often occurred behind the scenes, in moments when he chose to do what was right, regardless of the cost. Michael Yates eventually left Hollywood entirely, moving to another state where he worked in businesses unrelated to entertainment. His assault on Sandra Mills and the subsequent consequences orchestrated by Wayne effectively ended his connection to the film industry and served as a warning to other privileged men about the potential costs of abusing their power. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore. Men who understand that with great power comes great responsibility. Men who are willing to sacrifice profitable relationships to protect vulnerable people. Men who believe that justice matters more than money and that doing the right thing is worth whatever it costs. Wayne's response to Sandra Mills's assault reminds us that true heroism often requires choosing courage over comfort and principles over profit.